Hello, my name is Sean Kavanaugh. I'm a technical marketing manager here at Red Hat. Today we'll be talking about 5 great use cases for network automation. You'll see my GitHub and Twitter handle. They're both the same. It's at IPVSean. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's look at a quick agenda. What are we even talking about today? So I'm going to go over what the Red Hat Ansible automation platform is, how that relates to open source Ansible and the Ansible project that most people are familiar with. We're going to talk about 5 great use cases using the Ansible Network Automation Platform. This is regardless if you're using the product or upstream open source Ansible. And then I'm going to give some nice links on where to go to next. Everyone is familiar with upstream open source Ansible. So if I do a DNF install, yum install, apt-get install Ansible, or I'm doing just a pip install Ansible, Ansible is one of the de facto largest automation tools out there today. I think we've reached the top 10 in GitHub for years now. I don't have it in my head or off the top of my head how many years it's been, but at least 3 or 4 times we've been in the top 10. So what we do at Red Hat is we take that upstream open source initiative and we've turned this into a enterprise product. And not only are we doing that, is there's actually multiple upstream projects. It's not just Ansible. So for example, Ansible Navigator, it's its own project. It's a new command line tool for running execution environments. Ansible Builder is its own upstream project. Upstream project meaning an entirely different GitHub repo, different community, different users. We have Private Automation Hub, which is a way to share content and kind of put content in people's hands, content being automation content. So we have all these different components. I'm not covering them all today, but I think it's suffice to say that a command line Ansible is not the same as just Ansible, and it's not just Tower. It's not just a web UI on top of Ansible. There's a lot more to it, and we've created these tools working with our customers and our partners to figure out what they needed to scale automation out. So we also have these use cases. So these little symbols here kind of take a security automation, infrastructure, data center automation, network automation, and we apply automation to these use cases. We take upstream goodness, we turn this into an enterprise product, we stabilize it, we take the best, and we package this into a bundled installer or an OpenShift operator. We take those automation domains, security automation, infrastructure automation, network automation, and we apply them to kind of different use cases, whether it's a data center, public cloud, private cloud, edge. Whether you're a community user or product user today, it's not really going to matter because we're going to cover use cases at a higher level, and I'm going to show some playbook examples in there, but the basis is going to be the same regardless of which way you're going. So let's get started. Use case number 1, config, backup, and restore. Why is it important? I could read you the slide, or I could just tell you it's easy. This is a very basic use case. It's a way to get your hands dirty without having to get super advanced automation. It's really, really, really simple with Ansible automation. It allows you to start adopting Automation Controller, some of the features of Automation Controller, and start understanding how Ansible works, but you don't have to go all in. So I say it's an intro level use case, but another one to talk about is use cases that are read only, meaning I'm not actually affecting production configuration. I'm not changing configuration. I'm just kind of doing operational tasks, like things a network operator would have to do anyway manually. And I will kind of elaborate on why I think Ansible Automation Platform is the best and why I chose to work for Red Hat and work on this product. So this is how simple a playbook can be. We have the playbook, it's YAML. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of YAML or building playbooks, but you can see really here, if you learn Ansible and you're new to Ansible, and how many lines is this? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of code. This role is prepackaged. This is one I made. And you'll actually see that the role is not even that complicated. So in like 7, 8 lines of code, you can back up hundreds, if not thousands of devices at the same time. It's really simple. It's multi-vendor. It makes a lot of sense to use something like this rather than having network engineers have to learn a programming language like Python or Ruby or write their own custom C scripts, because we want network engineers and network architects to worry about networks, not worry about their programming chops and their skills there. So if we peek beneath the covers of my kind of pre-canned automation content that's available to all of our customers and community, we can look at each of these modules. The config modules just has a backup parameter. So this is really easy. So you don't need to be, again, a programmer. You can just be a network engineer that happens to be good at some automation language. So backup true. And you also notice that regardless of the network vendor and the CLI chops you have for an individual network platform, is that the Ansible playbook looks pretty identical. And we're just registering this output from the backup file so that we can copy it to a server, a database, Amazon S3, wherever we want to back up our network configurations. So we start abstracting away not only the backups, but the automation here can now back up multiple different vendors. And going back again to the previous slide, like this is all you would do is you can just call this role. This is a namespace network, my toolkit, backup, bam. And then you can be a network engineer and you can start recycling these automation kind of scripts that you're writing. So let's take this to automation controller. This is where it gets more interesting, is when you have 2 or more people that start using the same automation content, the automation playbooks, you can start putting this into automation controller. And this allows push button IT, meaning I click a button in a website and then that will make the automation happen. And you can still troubleshoot it and look at it. So each task, the output will happen here within the web UI. And then Automation Controller itself has an API. So if you happen to use some other tool like ServiceNow, you can start your automation there. Say like, I want to do network backup, click it, and then it will happen. And it talks to Automation Controller and then it logs everything wherever you want it. Now, what's also cool about Automation Controller is all of these kind of enterprise features that people want. TACACS, Radius, SAML. How do we authenticate to it? Let's not reinvent the wheel. And that's our plan with all Red Hat software, is we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We do certain things really well. An automation controller, an Ansible automation platform, is meant to be kind of your control conduit for everything for kicking off playbooks and workflows. So another feature I like to talk about is surveys. So surveys allows you to kind of elevate variables to a user-friendly form, just like SurveyMonkey or Google surveys. When you're kind of filling out like a Google sheet, like a spreadsheet, this is the same idea, but now you can take variables and you can kind of put guardrails on them for your users. So the person that writes the playbook might be a network engineer working with someone that might have some more Ansible chops than himself, but then they can kind of elevate this to other people on their team. So maybe you have a Cisco expert that wants to kind of restore or back up a Juniper switch. So they're a clever network engineer, but they just don't want to worry about learning the Juniper commands, or they don't remember them. So you can kind of automate and abstract that away, and you can kind of have multiple choice, single select, multiple choice, multiple select. You can have free form where you can type something in. So if you want to like configure the message of the day or the banner on a network switch. So this allows you to kind of have a lot of flexibility in what someone can control from a GUI standpoint that then goes into the automation as uses variables within the automation. So surveys are guardrails for automation. So imagine like you could, another example I like to do is VLANs. So maybe you have a suite of 20 VLANs that you allow other teams to use. You could make those choices that they could fill out in a survey. So if they need to turn on or off or decommission provision VLANs across the network, you can give them access to each team, kind of segregates them out, and you can kind of make it available through automation. All right. So use case number 2 is infrastructure awareness. So this is another read-only task, right? I have a read-only in there, meaning like I'm not making a change to infrastructure. I'm simply running operational tasks to get information out of my network. And I'm going to kind of go into these, but we can normalize configuration. Normalizes means like if I have a Cisco IOS and a Cisco IOS XR, or a Cisco IOS XR and a Juniper Junos, or a Juniper Junos and an Arista EOS, is that a VLAN's a VLAN, but the way they configure it, the way it is represented in their running configuration is different. Now, dynamic documentation and normalization, these kind of can go together. Dynamic documentation is simply taking data out of the real-time network and turning it into something more interesting. So what I always like to say is when I worked support for network companies, your best choice for source of truth of what was actually happening in the network was the running configuration. So it didn't matter, even if I had asked for a network diagram, a network map, or what's happening, is half the time the person opening the ticket wasn't actually the person that configured it. And it was faster for me just to kind of like do a bunch of show commands on their network and slowly figure out what they had there, what was configured, what was actually going on, do some pings, do some trace routes, and kind of create my own little network map, literally on pens and papers while I'm on the phone with certain customers. Dynamic documentation changes the game because I can kind of automate that part where I'm grabbing the information dynamically and kind of creating something really quickly. So again, it's read-only. So this is a way, like I could automatically have this open a ticket in Zendesk, right? This is really cool to start looking at your network from the way an operator would. And again, I think Ansible is the standard here, is that we have multiple platforms and we can interact with stuff that's not network. That's a huge paradigm shift from a lot of network automation tools out there. Is Ansible is a network automation first platform, but we're always a Linux platform. We also integrate with all the public clouds, ServiceNow I brought up earlier, hundreds of different platforms, messaging platforms, and we have generic API requests. So if you have your own tool that like people don't know about, a proprietary tool within your company, we can talk to that too. We have like a REST API modules and ways we can interact with that as well. So we can take the information out of the network and shove it into something else. So let's kind of look what that looks like. So we take that network native configuration. The term for infrastructure awareness, if we turn this into like an actual Ansible term, would be facts. So key value pairs, structured data that's coming out of a network. I removed a lot of the output for brevity, but you can imagine is anything coming out of a network switch, the version, interface, MTUs, OSPF configuration, BGP configuration, VLAN configuration, every resource module that we have, we can convert this to structured data. And the more modules we come out with, the more structured data we have. So it'd be very, like, I think we cover 80-90% of that already. And then we have ways we can actually convert stuff that we don't know about, where it's some custom new network switch. We can convert that unstructured data to structured data pretty easily. So why is structured data important? Structured data is important because it's malleable. It is able to be customized and turned into things that are interesting. So we can put this into Markdown, we can put this into websites, we can put this into all kinds of cool websites to represent this key value data that might not be that cool looking, not look great, not be human readable, but now it's structured. It's not just a blob of text from a Cisco switch, which is only really recognizable by that network engineer. I mean, you get certifications like I've done to even be able to understand the output you're getting from show commands from certain network devices. So we can look at that data directly in Automation Controller. It's represented in there. So that same output I just showed is I can just click on JSON tab in there, and I can look exactly at what that data looks like. It becomes really easy then to malleable and make this easy to change. Right, so here is an automation controller. I have a bunch of network jobs here that I've run. I just ran a network report. So what this did is it ran a bunch of fact gathering, and then it created a little website. So I actually used automation to create a website. So it actually installed it. It copied the CSS over. And then if I click right here, I can grab the web URL that it created dynamically on a little Rel 8 box that I have. And what it did is dynamic documentation. So here is a little website I wrote, and all it did was transform really easily. It's just a Jinja template creating the website, and each resource module creates a little HTML table. So we can see here real quick, like imagine if I actually had a real data center switch with 52 ports and I see that some MTU is misconfigured. I could even put little if statements that says if MTU doesn't equal this, I can highlight it red. If something's not configured, like I don't have VLANs on the Cisco router that's running in AWS, it just says no VLAN information is configured. If I look at IP address information, I can look at that too. So it gets you kind of a lay of the land really quickly. And this is completely customizable. This is just an example, a sample, if you will, of what's happening here. I can see how it connected to the device, what version of Ansible I use to connect to it. And these are all different boxes. So this is an Arista EOS and this is Juniper Junos. So this is what we mean by dynamic documentation. Now, you might not want a website. You might want to pump this into something like Infoblox or pump it into another IPAM tool of your choice or a database. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that it's structured data is that it's much easier to work with. It's more malleable. If you're counting, it's use case number 3. We're past halfway now, right? Once we actually finish this. So scoped config management. And you'll notice I didn't say config management, I said scoped. And I don't know if this is the best word. This is a Sean special that I got approved by product management. And the reason I say scoped versus config management is I want to make sure people realize that automation is not all or nothing. Meaning I don't need to automate my entire switch configuration to have a win. For example, if I just automate my VLAN configuration and that saves my network engineers a few hours a week, where I'm enforcing my VLAN configuration, I'm not allowing VLANs to be configured that shouldn't be there, I'm enforcing ones that should be there, that might be more important and faster to roll out and getting automation victories than waiting to automate every last configuration on network switch, especially if you have very complicated configurations. I think a lot of times when people start automation journeys, there's always like, what about this? What about that? And like trying to think of like this switch has a very complicated configuration rather than trying to concentrate on what's common between network devices and what we can automate away is we got to find what we can automate. So we have this concept of resource modules. Resource modules can idempotently configure something like just VLANs or just SNMP or just ACLs or just prefix lists. These are very simple native data models that you can take, apply to a network switch, and enforce that they are there. So if I have VLANs 1, 5, 10, and I only want this configured, I can enforce that only VLANs 1, 5, and 10 are on that device. So we need some sort of source of truth. This is very flexible with Ansible Automation Platform. It can be Git, and a lot of times it's Git. It could be Infoblox, it could be NetBlocks, it could be Device42. And this network operator, he can configure a source of truth wherever he wants, and then we absorb that. So a VLAN's a VLAN again, remember? And then I enforce that configuration onto these devices. It does not matter what vendor it is. I think there's dozens and dozens of network vendors that are supported with Ansible Automation today. The fact is that it'd be rare you would have something we can't automate. I'm sure there is plenty of stuff, but the fact is most platforms are covered now. So now we're just kind of worried about teaching automation. Like the fact isn't technology anymore. It's just adopting it culturally. And this is a way to adopt automation quicker for a team is not waiting till one person automates the entire configuration and templates out this massive configuration. Is why don't we just automate the VLANs? Something really easy. So going with that VLANs example, the VLANs are now just a source of truth. This is a YAML dictionary. This could literally be stored like this in Git, and that could be your source of truth. We take the resource module, the VLANs module, and then we apply that configuration to a network switch. You would literally say config equals colon, double curly bracket VLANs, end curly brackets, and then you'd be done. That's how simple this is. It's stupid simple to automate, and that's on purpose. And there you go. There's the actual playbook, the task. So this task, whether I have one Arista switch or 500 Arista switch or 5,000 Arista switches, that's your playbook. And then this is your source of truth, the data on the left. This could be stored in Git, Infoblox, again. Bam, bam, boom. So the last thing we talk about is state merged. Merged just enforces that the configuration that you apply is there. Replaced does a diff. So if I had like a name, see like servers here, it's going to go a little bit farther than that. It's going to enforce that the old name is removed and servers is put there. Overridden goes a little bit farther. It's going to look at VLANs that weren't there. So if I had VLAN 60 on the running configuration of the switch, it's going to go ahead and remove that and make sure only these VLANs are there. Now the difference between overridden and replaced is only worried about the subparameters of those VLANs, where overridden's looking at that entire resource, which is like VLANs. So replaced is very similar to overridden, but replaced is only worried about 20, 30, 40, 50 in this case, where overridden is worried about all the VLANs, 4094 for that device. It's hard to explain that difference until you start playing with it. And then finally, there's delete it, which is destroy and get rid of. And we kind of look at these kind of states as your maturity of adoption. As most people start with merge, they move to replace, then they move to overridden. And this is where we force that policy enforcement. Now there's a few more parameters I'm not covering here with scoped configuration management. You can actually gather information on a resource by resource, a resource by resource basis. So if I wanted to just gather facts around VLANs, there's a gathered. There's also a way to render configuration. So if you don't have an active network, you could actually make playbooks and render the configuration for a Cisco device without actually having a Cisco switch to talk to. So there's a bunch of different parameters in there, and resource modules have, I think I have to count them up now. It's 7 or 8 different parameters in there for the state. Okay, use case number 4, parsing operational state. So we've been talking about configuration management. I could have moved into full-on configuration management, but I thought for use case number 4, I wanted to go with operational state validation. So this is going a little bit more than just hey, I reboot the switch or I'm backing up a switch. Is I went to look at operational state, meaning show IP BGP neighbor, show IP OSPF neighbor, show IP int brief, show CDP neighbor, show LLDP neighbor. And I'm looking at show commands. I'm forcing those into a structured data scheme, just like I did with the configuration, and then I'm using them to do something interesting. So why is Ansible Automation Platform really good at this? We're going to talk about workflows. Workflows allow us to do really cool things like rollback. So if I make a configuration change, like change the VLANs, then I check connectivity across my network. Then I notice it's down. Then I could roll back and run another job template based on the prior job template completing or not completing or whatever data I have there. Operational state can be treated just like Ansible facts. That means I can turn operational commands, it could be strings of text, into structured data, which become variables, which then means I can run automation on them and do interesting, cool stuff. So show run int Ethernet 1.1 can show IP OSPF neighbor. You can see how these are just blobs of text. And you can make this even more confusing. This is just looking at Cisco iOS, and you add in a half a dozen different network operating systems in there. You notice they're all slightly different. They all have different spacing. And even though you might be familiar with them, it might be harder and harder to figure out how do I grep this and get this value out of it? Or I just want to grab full out of this OSPF neighbor. How many spaces over is that? Can I use regex? The classical problem is if I am using regex, now I have 2 problems, right? But I think the more interesting thing is what should you parse? We have interface state. I think that's pretty important, is knowing if my interfaces are they actually hooked up to what I actually need. Going over to LLDP, right? Is the other side what I think it is? Same thing with OSPF and routing protocols. Is routing protocols become more interesting, especially BGP, because the configuration could be correct on my side, but not on the other side, meaning my BGP adjacency is not up or operating the way I think it is, or I'm not getting the routes that I think I should. So I think it's important to think of what should I parse? Just parsing every show command for the hell of it is not a great idea. But I think these are kind of a subset that I think are pretty interesting. Kind of like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, right? As you're going up the stack, is these become really interesting to parse, to check operational state, to check if whatever changes I made did what I want them to. And this kind of buzzword maybe 2 or 3 years ago would have been intent-based network, or declarative intent, I think is what we were using. Is did the configuration I intended do what I think it did? So we can guarantee the config compliance, this VLAN is on here and this route is on here, but we don't know if the network's actually doing what we want it to do. To help with this, we have this really cool, it's bundled with the Ansible Automation Platform, but just in case you are not using the product, is Ansible Utils. There's an Ansible Utils collection. It's full of a bunch of filters, including a way to integrate with operational state. It's actually included in the Ansible Network meta collection. So if you actually install the Ansible Network collection, you get this as a sub collection. So I have a webinar on meta collections, but I think you could summarize a meta collection as if I install this collection, it installs a bunch of other collections into one nice, easy bundle. And of course, if you're already paying for the platform, we bundle this all together into an execution environment, which I'm not covering in this webinar or this video. But I think it's just important to know if you want to browse through the documentation, just look at Ansible utils. It's really, really cool. If I do show interfaces, I get this blah of text. I think every network engineer and their mother and their father and their grandfather has seen, and we can just turn this into structured data again. So we can do interesting things with this like we showed with the fact gathering. Ansible Automation Platform has workflows. Workflows look exactly like this. So each of these corresponds to like a different unit of automation. We call them job templates is the parlance within Automation Controller, but just think of it as a playbook, a unit of automation. So if I did backup config, deploy some configuration, and when this splits with this colors, this is exactly what it looks like in Automation Controller, just zoomed in. Red means if this job fails, go here. If green means if this job succeeds, go here. And you can see if the operational state fails, it restores the configuration. So this gives us like a path. And then update source of truth. This means like now take the configuration on the box and update Git or info blocks or whatever again. So workflows are extremely important to Ansible Automation Platform, and it kind of allows you to kind of orchestrate a level up from the individual automation. So instead of looking at like backup as a unit of automation, we can now look at lots of different automation and kind of tie them together. Workflows even allow nesting of workflows. So you could have like your network workflow is nested within like an IT business process workflow, right? As the network's just one unit of whatever web application or HR software is being deployed or whatever the actual initiative is for a company. Okay. Number 5, last use case. Thanks for hanging on with me. Automated NetOps. Now this is kind of a catch-all that I went over for the naming again because I didn't know what to call this. This is kind of moving into stuff like GitOps. And GitOps is kind of looking at a whole unit, like looking at the workflow of automation itself. Not a workflow within automation, but like how do we adopt automation as a team and put this into practice in production. Configuration pipeline, CI/CD, and this is extremely important because this is just taking all the automation stuff we've done in the 4 previous examples, tying them together with a ribbon and a bow and going into production and creating a new culture around automation of like how we deploy it. And the reason we like Ansible Automation Platform here is we have native webhooks again to integrate with other tools. So again, we talked about source of truth. This is now tying this all together, and we have native webhooks for GitHub and GitLab. We work with Brownfield. And again, this not all or nothing is, I'm kind of saying automated NetOps is their nirvana, the thing where you want to get to, right? But this can even be adopted in steps, like all the 4 previous steps. And then this automated NetOps is like putting it into practice. So we're going to go step by step real quick. That's not very hard, is we declare that data model. So again, think back to step, I think it was scoped configuration management where we showed VLANs. So just think this is 3 VLANs in a dictionary and a YAML file. So we declare that data model. We make a pull request in the Git. So we just say like, hey, update my Git in GitHub. So my GitHub repo. Do a pull request. That pull request has a webhook. It automatically syncs to Ansible Automation Platform. So it does a little unit of automation itself. It goes boom, boom to Ansible Automation Platform and the API, little webhook. And then our workflow, we just showed that in the previous example. Maybe we have a virtual network. We set it up with something cool like Container Labs or GNS3 or one of the various other virtualization, or we have like a lab set up. So we test out the automation on our virtual network, our development site. Then this sends it back for approval. So we just talked about, or I'll talk about another screenshot in a second about approvals, is workflows that can actually have approvals, meaning like I can stop mid-automation for a human operator to come and check the results. So in this case, this development comes back. The network operator goes, hey, everything looks good. There was a couple of checks I didn't write, but I just manually looked at them. And then he clicks a button, it continues on in the workflow. We deploy it into production, whatever the changes were. So maybe like 2 or 3 of the switches needed their VLANs updated. And then we have completed NetOps. This is an example of NetOps or GitOps or depending on how far you take it and the interpretation and what book you've read. But this is using automation together in a model, because we're updating the source of truth. And really interesting is the configuration, the running configuration on my network is no longer important. The configuration here in Git's important, and then the architecture and the culture of my team is important. But now the network has become less important, because if a switch dies or something breaks, I can automate and replace it really quickly. And this is why so many organizations are moving to automation. It's because it allows us to be proactive, and it has all these kind of consequences, positive consequences to moving to automation. Regardless if you choose Ansible, regardless if you're paying for the product, you will get a lot of ROI on automating small annoying things out of the way and just kind of enforcing what you think is a configuration and network state out there. Approvals, this is what they look like. They can be configured to timeout. So if you don't want them sitting there, so you can actually kind of automate the approvals to like just time out if no one looks at them. So it could be kind of a pause or a pause to fail. We have RBAC within Automation Controller. So role-based access control. So not everyone could approve it. You could allow only super admins or a certain group. And this, again, is just a way to kind of pause, give time, and kind of adopt it in steps. I've completed the 5 use cases. I hope you enjoyed listening to me. I know it kind of went long, and it's hard to listen to someone as annoying as me for this long. But I have kind of 3 kind of ways to go forward for kind of action items for yourself to kind of continue your automation journey if you are interested in Ansible. I have a networking workshop online. You can actually go to this link and you'll actually see that there's workshops that are instructor-led. You can look at all the course material. It's available free online, but there's also self-led. So you'll see a link on this webpage if you just Control F down for self-led, kind of like they're hosted on Ansible.com, labs that you can do on your own. There's a network 1 or 2 in there already. I have 2 ebooks that are completely free. These are short ebooks. I think they're less than 30 pages each. So there's part 1. This is a little bit higher level. I don't even think there's like YAML in here, but it's kind of more cultural. This might be something if you're not interested in like your manager or someone who just needs to understand like a high level lay of the land. And then part 2 is more kind of like a 101 level. So a little bit more detailed than this talk may have been, where it shows you some examples and where to go. But I think it's a pretty good ebook, and we worked on it, and I'm pretty proud of it. And then for hardcore mode, we have, I think it's 4 to 5 days of training with our Global Learning Services program at Red Hat. And this is a really great course. It's, as the time of this recording, I'm recording in 2022, and they're redoing the course this year for Ansible Automation Platform 2. But whether you're getting the older course or the newer updated course, they're really good. The instructors are really great. I've taken some of these courses, including this one that I helped with, and I'm really proud of what we've done at Red Hat with our training program. It's incredible. And it's one of those kind of small classes where like you can ask some off-the-cuff question and that instructor will know exactly what you're talking about, and you'll deep dive on the side. So I really recommend doing this, whether it's online or in person or whatever you have available, is check out these trainings. And regardless if you're looking at the network training or something else, they're all just phenomenal across the board. So appreciate your time. Thank you for attending this video, and I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.